Few questions accompany humanity with such consistency as this one. What exists after death? For some, it's a mystery that frightens. For others, a silent hope. But when a man like Edgar Cayce shares what he saw and felt upon entering states of deep consciousness, even the most skeptical pause to listen. Known for his ability to access information while asleep, he reported experiences that went beyond what the eyes can see. And among all his messages, one in particular deeply touched the hearts of thousands of people. It wasn't a catastrophic prediction. It was a serene, luminous, almost familiar description of a place that many call heaven. What Cayce said didn't seek to convince, but to comfort. He didn't speak of promises or dogmas, but of a reality that revealed itself clearly to anyone who was ready to listen. This vision doesn't just speak of life after death. It speaks of the life we can still live with more lightness and less fear. According to Cayce, heaven wasn't a place delimited by golden gates or streets made of precious stones. It was rather a state of consciousness where the spirit rediscovers its true essence. He described a space of great peace where there was no judgment or punishment, only learning and acceptance. There, each soul was received with love, no matter what it had lived through or done wrong on its journey on earth. This description became one of the most comforting because it excluded no one. It was an accessible heaven, not through merit, but simply because we are part of something bigger. If you are listening to this video and feel that you have already experienced losses, fears, or regrets, this message may resonate deeply. And if you feel that it makes sense, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. This helps us bring more messages like this to those who also need peace. After all, we all have the right to hear that heaven may be closer than we imagine. Often, we associate the idea of heaven with fixed images learned in childhood or taught in religious ceremonies. But Cayce broke through these images and brought something more intimate. He reported encounters with people who had already passed away, not as frightening apparitions but as emotional reunions. He spoke of environments with abundant nature, soft light, and a feeling of belonging impossible to describe with words. Everything there seemed to recognize the individual not for their faults, but for their purest essence. What was most impressive wasn't the visual aspect of these places, but the complete absence of fear, pain, or loneliness. It was as if the spirit returned to a home it had forgotten. And for those who live today with fears of what comes next, hearing something like this can completely change the way they look at life. Because it's not about believing blindly, but about considering that perhaps, just perhaps, we are not as lost as it seems. Another important point in Cayce's accounts was the notion of continuity. He didn't see death as a full stop, but as a crossing. According to him, upon leaving the physical body, the soul goes through a brief moment of recognition, as if awakening from a deep sleep. In that instant, it realizes that it is still alive, conscious, and able to reflect on its existence. Cayce said that many were surprised to notice that their thoughts and feelings remained active, but now free from the weight of the body and the pressures of earthly life. This continuity brought comfort to many who were afraid of disappearing into nothingness. On the contrary, he spoke of a broader life, where everything we are continues to develop, learn, and connect with other souls. For him, heaven was also a space for reunions, mutual learning, and above all, deep peace. This gave meaning to life and death as two sides of the same journey. There is something very powerful in imagining that at the end of this life, we will not find judgment, but understanding. Cayce said that many souls arrived in heaven carrying guilt, fear, and sadness, but upon being welcomed, they began to understand their experiences in a different light. He spoke of spiritual counselors who helped these souls reflect on their choices, not with punishments, but with compassion. It was like a great school of the soul, where each one understood better what they had lived through, where they went wrong, and how they could evolve. This process wasn't automatic or imposed. The soul participated actively, with freedom and awareness. This completely changed the idea of eternal punishment. Instead, a continuous path of growth emerged, even after death. This vision didn't deny human errors, but showed that there is always a chance to start over. For older folks who carry the weight of difficult decisions, hearing this can bring a new relief. It wasn't just about comfort, but about a new way of living in the present. If everything we do has continuity, if every thought and gesture follows us after death, then it's worth taking care of what we cultivate inside. Cayce insisted that heaven begins to form here on earth when we learn to forgive, to understand, and to accept our humanity. He said that the most serene souls after death were those who had already begun this process in life. And this didn't require perfection, just a willingness to look more kindly at oneself and others. The message he left wasn't just about what will come later, but about how to live better now. If death isn't the end but a continuation, then every present moment gains value. Living well, according to him, was preparing to find oneself in a place where everything makes sense. In many accounts made by people who have had near-death experiences, there is a constant, a welcoming light, a feeling of absolute love, an encounter with something greater than words can define. Edgar Cayce, in his Altered States of Consciousness, described something very similar. There wasn't a throne, there weren't stern figures waiting for answers, but there was a presence, something he called divine consciousness, that enveloped us with understanding. This presence didn't judge harshly, but observed with depth. It was as if our whole life was shown with care, not to punish us, but to help us understand what we can still improve. For many who grow old with fear of what they will find on the other side, this image offers relief. It's like knowing that we won't be forgotten or abandoned, and that everything we've lived through has value. And the most beautiful thing, no one arrives alone. There is always someone waiting, someone who recognizes us and calls us by name. Cayce believed that before reincarnating, souls choose their experiences based on what they need to learn. But after death, there is a pause, a time of serene evaluation, where the soul has space to breathe, reflect, and above all, rest. For him, this interval is fundamental, because it's where the spirit recovers its energy and clarity. It's in this place, which he called the spiritual plane, that we meet again those we love and who have passed on before. Many people have reported that upon hearing these messages, they felt as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. Because it wasn't necessary to understand everything or to have lived a perfect life, it was only necessary to be willing to continue learning. This idea becomes especially touching when we get older and begin to question what we have done, what we have failed to do, or who we were. Knowing that there is time, that there is continuation, and that we are guided with patience is like a breath of calm for the soul. In his vision, heaven was made of stages. There wasn't a single fixed place for everyone, but different levels of experience according to the consciousness of each soul. This wasn't a classification of better or worse, but a natural reflection of what each one carried internally. Cayce described that some souls arrived on the spiritual plane with so much confusion that they needed more time to orient themselves. Others arrived in peace and soon felt ready to move on. But in all cases there was assistance, beings of light as he called them, who had as their mission to help in this process. Nothing was imposed. Everything happened with respect and free will. This vision helps to reduce the anxiety of those who fear not being prepared. For according to Cayce, no one is left behind. Each soul receives the necessary care in the right time with love and understanding. For seniors who carry difficult memories, this idea can be an unexpected and very welcome balm. An important point in his accounts was that the soul maintains its connections. The bonds formed in life don't break with death. On the contrary, they are strengthened on another level. Cayce said that true love continues to vibrate even after the body departs. Those we love don't disappear. They just change state and often continue to be by our side, accompanying us in silence. This doesn't mean hauntings or strange presences, but rather a subtle connection, which can be felt in moments of intense longing, strong intuition, or even in dreams. For those who have already lost loved ones, this idea is deeply comforting. We are not alone, even when we believe that we are. And when our time comes, we will also be received by familiar faces, by voices that are familiar to us. Death ceases to be an abyss and becomes a crossing, where reunion becomes a natural part of the path. In addition to peace and acceptance, Cayce spoke of a heaven where learning didn't cease. Souls continued to evolve, studying, contributing to others, sharing experiences. It was like a large community of spirits, each on their journey, but all connected by the same purpose, to grow in consciousness. This dismantles the idea of a static heaven where everything stops and becomes a senseless eternity. On the contrary, there was movement, joy, constant discoveries. For him, heaven wasn't the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new stage, broader and clearer. Old age, which sometimes brings the feeling that everything has already been lived, gains new meaning in light of this vision. Because getting older is not ending a story, but preparing to continue it on another plane. It's like changing rooms in the same house. And knowing this, according to many who heard Cayce, can transform the way we see our own final days. There is a deep simplicity in the way Cayce spoke about heaven. He didn't use difficult words, nor did he try to impress with complicated concepts. He simply conveyed what he saw with clarity and serenity. And perhaps that's what touched so many people the most, the idea that heaven is within everyone's reach, without distinction. It's not necessary to belong to a specific religion or to follow rigid rules. What matters, according to him, is what we cultivate within us. Compassion, humility, honesty, a sincere desire to learn and improve. These are the true passports to that place of light he described. It's not about being perfect, but about seeking, even with mistakes and stumbles, a more conscious path. And if that's the case, then heaven already begins here, in small gestures, in simple choices, in the way we treat others and ourselves. Spiritual life, said Cayce, is not separate from real life. It starts exactly where we are. As people age, many begin to rethink their priorities, revisit their memories, and evaluate the meaning of the time they've lived. Cayce's vision offers a fresh perspective on this process. He spoke of how each phase of life has unique value and that aging, far from being a decline, is a preparation for spiritual awakening. In his words, the final years are like a serene sunset that precedes an unknown but beautiful dawn. And this new dawn for him wasn't an empty promise. It was a real, tangible continuity, where everything we've learned takes on new purpose. Cayce said that many older adults already carry within them wisdom that will be useful on the other side, because what is accumulated in consciousness is never lost. This gives new meaning to the very idea of time. Every conversation, every silence, every forgiveness given or received, all has value. Nothing is wasted, because everything prepares us for the next stage. For those who feel regrets, Cayce's message is especially important. He said that on the other side there is no condemnation, but rather opportunity. The soul has a chance to understand the reasons behind each action and to transform what caused pain. There is no court, but a mirror that shows not only what we did, but what we felt, what we tried, what we left unsaid. And in that reflection, we see ourselves more deeply than ever before. This image may seem harsh, but in Cayce's words, it is accompanied by such great acceptance that fear dissolves. The idea that it's never too late to adjust the course of the soul brings hope to those who carry old burdens. It's not about erasing the past, but about understanding it more clearly and using that understanding as a basis to move forward. According to him, eternity is made of continuous chances for learning and evolution. One of the most frequent questions Cayce received was about loved ones. Where are they? How are they? Do they see us? Do they wait for us? And he responded calmly that true love is never lost. The souls that loved us in life continue to accompany us, cheering us on, helping whenever possible. They don't interfere with our choices but offer presence. He said that in many cases, these presences are felt in the most unexpected moments. A sudden memory, a vivid dream, a feeling of warmth in the chest. This shouldn't be a cause for fear, but for comfort. Knowing that we are not alone, even on the most difficult days, can change the way we live. And when the time comes to depart, we won't go to an empty place. We will be received with joy, with recognition, with that kind of hug that only those who love us know how to give. For those who are aging and feeling the loss, this vision is a true gift. Cayce also emphasized that each soul has its own rhythm. There is no hurry or comparison on the spiritual plane. Each one walks according to their needs, their pains, and their discoveries. This is important to understand, especially when living in a world that so values productivity and immediate results. In the heaven that Cayce described, time was different. There was no urgency, only presence. Each soul could breathe, reflect, reorganize itself internally. And this process happened with support, with guidance. There were beings that he described as wise and loving, whose only mission was to help other souls find themselves again. This brings a feeling of relief. We are not being thrown into a new world without a map. We are guided. And even those who departed with fear or confusion, according to Cayce, find this support. No soul is alone. Heaven, for him, was also a network of acceptance where everyone has value and where everything makes sense. Perhaps one of the most touching aspects of Cayce's message is the idea that heaven is built from now on. He said that our attitudes here define what we will feel when we cross the veil of death. Not as a punishment, but as a natural consequence of what we carry inside. If we cultivate kindness, compassion, and truth, we will find an environment compatible with that. If we carry resentment and fear, we will need more time to adjust. But we will never be lost. Heaven is therefore also an inner construction, and this construction is made in the details, in a word said with respect, in a gesture of forgiveness, in a look of empathy. Cayce didn't sell an easy salvation, but showed that everything depends on how we live now, and this gives us back control. Even at an advanced age, there is still much to plant. And every seed of love sown here will blossom on the other side. This certainty strengthens and consoles. He didn't deny that the end of physical life could be painful, especially when there is suffering, limitations, or losses. But he insisted that this end was not a punishment, but a transition. Pain, according to him, is fleeting, and the soul is soon enveloped by a peace that surpasses any human understanding. Many of those who heard his messages began to face death with less fear, not because they stopped feeling, but because they began to understand. Understanding the process, even if partially, already brings a different tranquility. And that's exactly what Cayce offered. Understanding. Death ceases to be taboo and becomes part of life, as an expected, natural, and even welcome stage. Not as an escape, but as a return. For many older adults, this brings a new perspective on what can still be lived. Because if there is continuity, then there is still purpose. And living with purpose, even in the last chapters, is what gives dignity to the journey. One of Cayce's most valuable contributions was removing the weight of beliefs based on fear. He didn't speak of eternal hell, nor of irreversible punishments. His message was simple: every soul has value and all experiences have a purpose. Even mistakes, when seen with awareness, become instruments of growth. For him, there was no waste in the spiritual journey. Everything we feel, suffer, or learn serves to shape the spirit. And this makes even the most difficult moments take on a new meaning. Cayce didn't ask for blind faith, but for attentive listening. He said that if we allow ourselves to reflect with an open heart, we will know what is true. This way of thinking resonates with many who, as they age, have moved away from rigid ideas and seek something more human, more direct. It is possible to believe without fear. It is possible to live the end of life with serenity, without the feeling of spiritual debt. This in itself is already a liberation. Another image he used frequently was that of a large spiritual library, where each soul could access the records of its own history. He called these records soul archives, and said that in them were all our experiences, intentions, learnings, and challenges. The reading of these records was not done by a judge, but by ourselves. It was an act of lucidity, not of condemnation. This allows the soul to deeply understand everything it has lived through and to choose, with more awareness, what it wishes to live next. This vision transforms heaven into a space of wisdom and autonomy. Aging with this idea is different. It removes the weight of others' judgment and returns to the person the power to understand their trajectory with clarity. Even if there are regrets, there are also successes, overcoming challenges and courage. And all of this matters. Life ceases to be an accumulation of errors and reveals itself as a path full of meaning and potential. In the final years of life, many people face silence, Distant children, slower routines, absences that hurt. And in this silence, profound reflections arise. What did I do? What did I fail to do? What awaits me? Cayce never promised easy answers, but said that this silence is also a preparation. It is in recollection that the soul begins to reorganize itself, to open itself to what comes next. He spoke of the importance of saying goodbye to life with gratitude, not with fear, of looking at the days lived as one looks at a photo album, recognizing the beauty even in the most difficult pages. The vision of heaven as a reunion with who we truly are helps to transform silence into peace. It's not about giving up on life, but about preparing to continue on another plane. And this preparation can be done with dignity, with calm, with conscious choices. Even without knowing the details, we can already align ourselves with this new stage. For those who live with illnesses, physical limitations, or constant pain, Cayce also left an important message. He said that the body is only a temporary instrument and that the soul is not affected by its failures. Pain does not define who we are. When the body can no longer sustain life, the soul is released with lightness. And what seemed like senseless suffering reveals itself as part of a cycle of learning. Nothing is in vain. Cayce reported that many souls, upon leaving the body, felt an enormous sense of relief, as if they were enveloped by a loving and silent presence that removed all the weight they had lived through. For those who are bedridden or suffer when seeing a loved one in this situation, this message can bring real comfort. Knowing that the end of the body is the beginning of the soul's freedom can transform anguish into acceptance. It is not necessary to understand everything. Just trust that there is something beyond, and that this beyond welcomes us with wisdom and care. And for those who are still here, walking, waiting, caring, or just trying to live one day at a time, Cayce's message continues to live on. He reminded us that heaven doesn't begin at death. It begins in the gesture, in the word, in the thought. It begins when we choose peace instead of conflict, when we practice forgiveness, when we seek to understand instead of judge. Heaven for him is an internal construction that accompanies us wherever we go. This means that even in old age, there is still time to cultivate light. There is still time to care for the soul. And this care is simple: honesty with oneself, compassion with others, gratitude for life. These are small attitudes, but which, according to Cayce, are greatly reflected on the other side. Aging, then, becomes a path of improvement, not an end. It is the moment to integrate everything that has been lived and to prepare lightly for what is still to come. If you've made it this far, it's a sign that something inside you recognized truth in the words of this video. Perhaps you remembered someone who passed away, or reflected on your own life with more affection. Perhaps you are feeling relief, or simply curiosity. The important thing is that you allowed yourself to listen, and that's already an important step. The message that Edgar Cayce left wasn't made to scare or impose, but to comfort. To remember that even in the face of death, there is beauty, purpose, and continuity, and that no one needs to go through this stage with fear. How about helping other people hear this too? If you can, share this video and subscribe to the channel. In this way, this message reaches more hearts that also need peace, because in the end, the heaven that Cayce described is not distant. It starts now within each of us, in the way we choose to live and prepare for what comes next.